Bay, it looks like we have a deal. Dear Bay, it looks like we have a deal. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Dear Bay, looks like we have a deal. What deal? It was a scam, and USB knew that from the very beginning. Both Kansas Solomon and Wynn Pierce knew from the start of the negotiation period, all the way until the signing of the contract, that this deal was a scam. What Wynn Pierce wrote in this April 22nd, 2009 letter, these were nothing but mere words. And by writing these words, Wynn Pierce was able to convince Oxbridge that USB was a long-term partner, a reliable partner, a trustworthy partner. And these representations were solidified in the smart plug contract signed just a week after this letter was sent on May 1st, 2009. Yet Oxbridge didn't know that the provisions in the smart plug contract were just collectively one big facade covering USB's underlying deceit. Oxbridge didn't know that USB was trying to pull a fast one on it. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about intentionally forming false statements. This case is about creating expectations intended to breach them. This case is about misleading and deceiving the blind, and that is exactly what USB did to Oxbridge, especially in regards to the best efforts provision of the smart plug contract. Let's discuss why USB contacted Oxbridge to begin with. USB took a risk by entering the European market. They knew that the Europeans preferred cerebral games prior to entering that market. They didn't like fast action games very much. They knew also that the smart plug was 4 years old at that time. Yet at the same time, the release of SP2 was right around the corner. Knowing all this, USB just wanted to test out the European market. Hence, they contacted Oxbridge, a company with a sterling reputation, but one that lacks experience in the video gaming industry. This made it easier for USB to find any excuse with Oxbridge's performance to just drop them, to complain about them. Hence, USB was just using Oxbridge as an experiment. And when the experiment was finished, peace out. Ironically, Kansas Solomon stated that he wanted to inject new blood into Oxbridge's business. He wanted to inject new blood by licensing a 4-year-old technology when a new one was just to come out. He didn't mention anything about this during the negotiations period. Nothing about the SP2 was written in the contract, nor did Wynn Pierce ever mention this technology. This was kept a secret. The SP2 was a secret. Why? Because USB was unsure about the European market. Europe was not their logical first step like Asia was. They just wanted to test out the market. Let's talk about the negotiations now. Bay Rosenthal raised specific concerns regarding the entire relationship. Startup costs were going to be high. Oxbridge was anticipating suffering severe losses for the first several years of the contract. To ensure that this relationship was going to be long-lasting, the parties incorporated several provisions in the contract. The exclusive licensing provision, and the 5 to 10 year contractual duration. Wynn Pierce in the same letter wrote, "Here is to a long and profitable relationship." But we'll see that those were just words like everything else in the contract. Let's discuss Oxbridge's efforts now to sell the smart plug. This was no easy task. Oxbridge had to sell an expensive console in Europe, which was plagued by the financial crisis, especially the 4 Mediterranean countries with the zeros next to them. Oxbridge had to create product recognition for USB throughout the entire continent. That's from Canary Islands to, according to some sources, it can stretch all the way to Armenia. That's a huge piece of land. And Europeans were not very accepting. They weren't very receptive to action games. They preferred cerebral games. So in essence, Oxbridge was tasked with changing cultural preferences. This is an enormous obligation, and it doesn't take place overnight. It doesn't take place over a year. It doesn't take place over 2 years. More reasonably, according to Oxbridge's projections, between 5 to 10 years, they could have done this. Imagine having to persuade the French to abandon Brie and to pick up American craft singles. Or what about convincing the Greeks and the Italians to start using Mazola oil and not olive oil? Even more, think about the Germans. What about telling a German not to eat a bratwurst and to pick up a corn dog? This is exactly what Oxbridge was trying to do. It was trying to change cultural preferences because Europeans traditionally played cerebral games and they did not play American games, and they didn't blend very well, and it wasn't a very fast process. Let's see how Oxbridge made this happen. Mr. Branford adopted a UK-centered approach where he would focus on sales in the market he knew best, his homeland. And from there on, the sales would ripple on over to the following countries. A contract involves 2 people or more, not just one person like how USV is presenting this case. USV presents the case as though a very greedy intent to this contract. They have not once mentioned Oxbridge's benefits to the contract. They just are complaining that they didn't get enough. They want more and more and more. Well, the strategy Mr. Branford adopted suited both USV's and Oxbridge's long-term strategies and objectives. The proposition was less risky, and it was more affordable and more contemporary with the times. Let's contrast this with Bay Rosenthal's proposition. Bay Rosenthal proposed that 70% of the advertising budget goes only to the smart plug. Oxbridge is a games and toys company. It has other obligations and other products it has to sell. It can't devote that much money to one product. That's putting all your eggs in one basket. And if something happens, that's a lot of loss. It's a very risky proposition, and it was properly rejected in accordance to the way Oxbridge operates. Moreover, the commercials that Bay Rosenthal wanted to produce, the multilingual commercials, just imagine you're watching a sitcom here in America, and all of a sudden a French lady pops up and starts speaking about a video game console. You'd be confused, and you'd probably say, what happened? I'll continue the channel. That's the exact kind of proposition that Bay Rosenthal was suggesting. And Mr. Branford rejected this proposition and adopted what he thought was best. After all, he had perpetuated his grandfather's company and had maintained that sterling reputation that had made Oxbridge so valuable. And to preserve Oxbridge's operations, Bay Rosenthal resigned because she was just an incompatible member of the Oxbridge team. Given these obstacles, there was success in the market. Oxbridge was pretty successful in selling the smart plug. Oxbridge was able to penetrate the European market. It was able to sell the smart plug in 8 out of 12 European community countries. And this was during the financial crisis. Oxbridge was also able to achieve 10% growth for the following year, and it was projected that these sales would keep growing. And this all happened in 2 years' time, 2 years out of a 5 to 10 year contract. Oxbridge was able to generate a lot of revenue for USP. Opposing counsel talked about gizmos and cars. Well, in order to fix USP's cars, Oxbridge incurred a total loss of $31 million. How much more do you need to do? $31 million. Oxbridge never complained about incurring this loss. This was Oxbridge's obligation under the contract. Oxbridge was in the red, in the negative. USB in the positive and the green. And how did USB reply to this? They stated, fortunately, we have the SP2. I do not want Oxbridge to handle the SP2 for us. I want to give this product to a firm that can do miracles. Not one that will be just satisfactory. Even though Oxbridge made a lot of money for USB, this wasn't enough. As a result, USB was ready to deploy the Smart Plug Devastator, the SP2. By secretly licensing this technology to the rival firm in the continent, USB was able to wreak havoc on Oxbridge's Smart Plug sales. After deployment of the SP2, USB representatives stated, and when Pierce stated, that all USB wanted was a beachhead in Europe via Oxbridge, because they ultimately wanted to license the SP2 to a continental firm. And that's exactly what they did. These were the words of Bay Rosenthal, of Wynn Pierce, the individual that wrote, "Here is to a long and profitable relationship." The individual who wrote, "Dear Bay, looks like we have a deal." Once Smart Plug was receptive in Europe, once Oxbridge was successful at selling the Smart Plug, USB claimed that Oxbridge failed to use its best efforts and aborted them, dropped them just like that. The experiment was over. Hence, USB attempted to shroud the best efforts provision of the Smart Plug contract in terms of deception. They didn't want best efforts. They wanted miracles. This was their excuse. Yet, best efforts are not described as good sales, bad sales, good profit, less profit. Best efforts is defined as a diligent attempt, and that's exactly what Oxbridge did. It diligently carried out its obligations under the Smart Plug contract. And hence, USB tried to pull a fast one on Oxbridge. And ladies and gentlemen, we all know how that feels. Members of the jury, you will shortly be receiving a jury verdict form. Please fill it out accordingly. For number 1, no. For number 2, no. For number 3, yes. For number 4, yes. If you find that Oxbridge met its burden of proof on both the SP2 is an improvement and a modification to the Smart Plug claim, and also that Oxbridge attempted its best efforts to sell and distribute the